Good evening and welcome to the opening event of the Sustainability Days at EPFL. My name is Julie Winz. I'm a journalist and podcast producer for RTS, and I'm delighted to be joining you for the next hour and a half. The Sustainability Days offer you 3 days of activities at the Rolex Learning Center, where we'll be thinking together about how to innovate and take action for a sustainable future. Tomorrow's event, dedicated to members of the EPFL community and the world of research, offers a series of events focusing on the energy transition, climate-neutral technologies, and sustainable construction. During the conferences, you can look at topics such as sustainable purchases at EPFL, what are the issues, what tools, what actions. If you're most of a gourmet, I invite you to sign up for the vegetarian cooking workshop. And if you're lazy, you can simply go and enjoy the meal Rien ne se perd, tout se cuisine, made from unsold products from supermarkets. And to help you digest, I highly recommend the excellent guided tour at the EPFL Thermal Power Plant and Data Center. Today, the partner event, the Sustainable Innovation Challenge, so teams from various European universities rack their brain to explore innovative solutions to the major challenges of sustainability. You can attend the team speech tomorrow at noon. On your way out, I recommend the exhibition on incredible corals with an exceptional capacity to resist climate change, which is located behind you outside the Rolex Learning Center. And this exhibition offers me a perfect transition, since the Red Sea corals and the AI that enables them to be conserved will be the subject of one of the lectures on Saturday, which will be open to the public. 4 wonderful presentations that I have the great pleasure to host. There will also be workshops on how to give a second life to your lamps, for example, and cafés scientifiques, such as one on building differently. Let's take inspiration from the African continent. You're going to say to me, that's all very well and good, but what are we doing tonight? Tonight we're holding an event on the theme of when AI meets sustainability, environmental, social, and ethical perspectives. First, there will be a talk lasting around 30 minutes, followed by a roundtable discussion right here with our incredible guests. Then it will be your turn to work and ask some questions before finally apéro time. And who better to introduce this evening than EPFL's Vice President for Support to Strategic Initiatives. As a postdoctoral researcher at Princeton University, she made significant advancement in developing stretchable solutions, electronics that could be implemented in biological systems more easily than typical electronic hardware. Shortly after, she became head of the Stretchable Bioelectronics Group at the Nanoscience Center in Cambridge. In 2011, the EPFL managed to recruit her, good job guys, where she currently leads the Lab for Soft Bioelectronics Interfaces, where the research explores materials, technology, and integration of electronic skins. A big round of applause for Stéphanie Lacour.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to open the EPFL Sustainability Days. Before I dive into the topic, I also want to take a minute to thank Agnès Letiec, who's really the person behind this whole organization. So a big round of applause for Agnès. Oh, she's here. All right. So I would like to maybe situate a little bit the conversation here at the EPFL around sustainability. So in 2022, EPFL adopted the climate and sustainability strategy, and the objective was not to simply signal awareness, but to really recognize the scale of the challenge behind sustainability and derive some concrete actions, mostly around, or particularly around our own campus, to reduce emissions and work towards the net zero ambition. And so this strategy reflects an understanding that sustainability requires measurable commitments, operational adjustment, and long-term accountability. And part of the strategy that we came up with for climate and sustainability, the 2 days that we're about to embark on really are elements that will allow us to share some of the advances that have been produced in the past few years around our campus, what changes have happened across the campus, how we talked, one of the topics, for example, is procurement, so how are things changing around our day-to-day operations. And then on Saturday, we will open the conversation with the larger public, and in particular with various ateliers where we can have also children that will also participate to this event, and we'll have also quite exciting conferences. So I encourage everyone to stick around and come on campus for the next 2 days. Now, there's a new kid on the block, basically. It's in the past couple of years, we've all started to talk about AI, so artificial intelligence. And today, AI is really permeating across all of our missions at EPFL. So we talk about AI in education, we talk about AI in research, and also in education. And so it is a new component that needs to be accounted for in all of our work. And so one important aspect is that we should recognize that AI is not just digital, it's really a physical system. It's built on servers, it requires chips, GPUs, it uses minerals or basic elements to form those chips, and it also requires a large amount of energy. So it requires also infrastructure like energy grids to articulate and operate. So its environmental footprint is real and growing. And we have to look at also how AI has the potential to improve the efficiency and prediction and coordination of the various tasks that we have to develop. And so the sustainability of AI is the topic of the evening. And this is, I think, not just a technical issue. We hopefully through also the panel, through first the presentation from Aimee, and then through the panel, we'll also discuss about governance and transparency and openness of this technology. And what I hope we will accomplish today is to just go beyond the narrative, the techno-optimistic versus the techno-pessimistic. We have to really collectively think about how we embrace AI and how we actually use it and help deploy it as the most efficient manner possible. And so to help us start the discussion, we will have, so I think I forgot to click on the slide. So, sorry. So this I already covered. All right, and this I also covered that we have AI across all of the EPFL missions. So I apologize for this. So now I go to my. The next part of the presentation is really to say we have experts now in this evening, starting with the presentation from Aimee van Wynsberghe, who will talk about repairing AI for environmental justice, and this will be followed with a panel with 4 members who will also continue the discussion and share very complementary perspective on how AI and sustainability should engage into a dialogue. So with this, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Lacour, for that introduction. Our next guest is the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Bonn. After a bachelor's degree in cell biology, it was robotics that led her down the path of ethics. She's the author of the book Healthcare Robots, Ethics, Design and Implementation, and founding editor for the international peer-reviewed journal AI and Ethics. Director of the Institute for Science and Ethics and founder of the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab, our guest is also a member of the expert group AI and Sustainability that is run by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, and served as a member of the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI. As you can see, she's one of the leading voices in AI and ethics today. Please give Aimee van Wynsberghe a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for the warm welcome, and thanks for the invitation to be here this evening. I should say, when I started looking into this research about 5 years ago, that was when I first sort of pitched the idea of sustainable AI, I had a lot of people laugh at me and say, it sounds like you're just putting, buzzwords together. Sustainable development, sustainability, artificial intelligence, there's nothing there. And so it was an interesting 5 years, yeah? And it makes me so happy to see events like this being held, that the conversation is maturing, that the topic is gaining attention, not only in the academic space, but also the media is paying attention, policymakers are paying attention. So I'm just thrilled that this event is happening and that you invited me to come and to speak with you all. So I changed my title a little bit, as we do. What I wanted to do is, because I know in the next hour and a half we'll have different voices who are coming together on a roundtable, and I want to talk to you about sustainable artificial intelligence from the perspective of the ethics of AI. And so I want to explain how, from my own perspective, how it fits into this space of AI ethics. What does AI ethics mean, and how we can conceptualize sustainable AI under this umbrella. So, like was said, I don't have a typical ethicist background. That I actually started studying cell biology back in Canada. That's where I'm from. Je parle français, un petit peu de français. So I studied cell biology, and I was working at a robotics institute where we worked with the Zeus telesurgical system, the Da Vinci surgical system, and we were training surgeons how to use these robots, right? And we were really training them based on a number of errors and how quickly they could complete a task. This is all with what we call dry lab experiments, so there was no human experimentation involved with the training of these surgeons, just to make absolutely clear. And I was struck by how, surgery was completely changing. You no longer have the surgeon with their hands inside the patient or standing over top of the patient. The surgeon is sitting at a console in one side of the room, using remote controls, if you will, and the patient is in another side of the room. And I kept asking my boss, I said, really? The way that we're going to evaluate this surgery is just how quickly they can do it and the lack of errors in their performance? And of course, these are really important factors, don't get me wrong. But I said, I feel like there's something more. I feel like responsibilities are shifting, roles are shifting. The entire practice of surgery seems to be evolving or shifting. We should be looking at it in a different way. And so my boss said, interesting questions. I think this is ethics, but I'm not entirely sure. So I left to go and to study ethics, and I did that through masters, PhDs, that kind of thing. And I've worked with policymakers, I've run not-for-profit organizations, I worked in private industry for a while as well, all talking about the ethics of robotics or the ethics of artificial intelligence. And I say this so that it kind of gives shape to the talk that I'm going to give for you. That in each of these roles that I have, I'm constantly remembering my time working with the robotic surgeons, the surgeons who are working with robots. Yeah? But I'm remembering that time where I'm trying to study and to learn about ethics and to bring it to other disciplines, to bring it to industry, to bring it to policymakers, because ethics is incredibly complex and nuanced. So how can we take the lessons and the tools from this space and bring it beyond the walls of academia? And so that's what I'm trying to do with my work in sustainable AI as well. And what this means then is that the ethicist has a role on the design team. So I call it ethicist as designer. And the ethicist is meant to sit at the table and to help uncover what are the values of importance within society that we want to see realized. How do we make sense of those values? And then how do we translate those values into technical requirements? So hopefully you will see that thread as I continue. So in the next 20 minutes, I hope 20 minutes, I do have a, I'm right on time so far. So in the next 20 minutes, what I want to do is to really briefly talk about what is ethics, what is the ethics of artificial intelligence, and then I want to introduce to you this next generation of AI ethics. And I refer to this as having a structural turn, which I'll explain as I go on, but that sustainability needs to be the focus of this third wave of AI ethics. And in order for me to make this argument, I need to talk about the planetary and the global nature, which we were briefly introduced to that idea already. But I need to make this argument about the global planetary nature of artificial intelligence. And I also want to talk about sustainability as going beyond strictly energy consumption and carbon emissions. I will mention that, but I want to talk about it going further. I'm standing right in front of the screen, but can you see it okay? Yeah, okay, because I'm not. Yeah, okay. So what is ethics, yeah? I could spend the next 2 days talking about what ethics is, and it depends who you ask, right? You could be thinking about consequentialist theories. So the consequences of an action determine whether or not something is right or wrong or good or bad. Or a deontological approach. If you follow a rule, if you follow a duty, a principle, that's what determines whether or not your action is right or wrong or good or bad. Then you can look at other older approaches, the Aristotelian virtue ethics approach. Ethics is about cultivating virtues, cultivating character traits that make you a good person, finding the balance between two different extremes. But then you have ethical traditions like Sub-Saharan Africa, the Ubuntu ethical tradition. And this is not looking at the individual and what's good for the individual, but really it's about the flourishing of the community. I am, therefore we are. We are, therefore I am. Then you have care ethics, a Western tradition that's based on non-Western approaches, but really looking at our roles, relationships, and responsibilities. So there's a variety of different ways that we can talk about ethics. But what I want to do, just to kind of form a sort of linear story here for you to follow, I say we take the Aristotelian approach and we talk about ethics in terms of the good life, what it is, and how we can achieve it. So we imagine the good life as being this kind of puzzle. And we have all of these different pieces that make up the puzzle. And the pieces are the values that we need to have realized in order to say that we have a good life. Safety, security, sustainability, well-being, all of these values. And they could change, right? New technologies are introduced. They change the sort of interpretation or the prioritization of these values. But essentially, we're trying to make sense of what the good life means and how we can achieve it. Then when we're talking about, with this in mind, when we're talking about the ethics of artificial intelligence, I say the ethics of AI is about how the making, the using, and the disposing of this technology impacts our picture of the good life. How does AI impact values like safety, security, sustainability? And this is how we can get closer to making an assessment or an evaluation on AI and our ability to achieve, or our picture even, of what the good life means today. But it's important two things are important here. The first one is that I said it's about the ethics of making, using, and disposing AI. So it's the AI infrastructure. So it's really important. I'm not saying that ethics is an afterthought, right? We make AI and we think, now what do we do, right? Now we need regulation. No. Ethics needs to be something that accompanies the design from the very idea generation of we want this kind of model, or we're going to train in this way. Ethics needs to be something there at the beginning and throughout the design process. And another thing is that it's not a checklist. So I'm not sure about the disciplines in the room, but when we're talking about the ethics of AI and how the values can be aligned in a different way, prioritized in a different way, these things are constantly changing. We see with generative AI, with models, with LLMs like Claude and GPT, the sycophancy, right, are curiosity, our interest, to have this thing talk to us in this very flattering way. I don't know if you use GPT. You don't have to admit it. You don't have to raise your hand. It's cool. It's cool. But you know, a friend told me, right, that when you ask GPT something, regardless of how interesting the question is, you'll get a response like, "Good idea, Amy. You're so smart." Yeah? And so we are currently in a situation right now where we are becoming accustomed to interacting with this machine in this very particular way. How is that impacting our ability to socialize with other human beings? There is an impact there, and we're in the middle of, well, we're at the beginning of finding out what that's going to look like. Okay, so my vision then of the ethics of artificial intelligence is to have this puzzle, yeah? And that the values within society are the puzzle pieces. And how is AI impacting these values, their understanding, their interpretation, or their prioritization, okay? But what I've also tried to do in my research is to say that ethicists, AI ethicists, are going through certain waves or trends, yeah, that we study certain things temporarily, or there's a temporal dimension. For a few years, we're really focused on this one thing, and then we sort of switched to a different thing. And I try to classify that. So bioethics had a similar kind of output, that bioethicists would be focusing on mitigating paternalism for a while, right? Autonomy was sort of the main thing that people were focused on. Then justice was. So I suggest a similar trend happening in the field of AI ethics. I suggest that the first wave of AI ethics was something that was very much focused on the ethics of superintelligence, artificial general intelligence, not to be confused with generative AI. But AGI is this idea of having super competent machines, and there's often a very dystopian picture that is portrayed alongside the AGI. So going to take all of our jobs, rise up and end humankind, Terminator-style scenarios, like, oh, we're all super afraid of what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen, but super afraid. Now, these were the kinds of ethical issues that people like Nick Bostrom would talk about 20 years ago or so. And then they started to fade away, that people recognized, well, the technology isn't here yet, still isn't here. We don't know if we'll ever achieve such an AGI that's being predicted. We won't even know if we recognize it when we do achieve it. Yeah? So then ethicists started to move into what I refer to as the second wave of AI ethics. And here we had AI ethicists who said, okay, there's so much going on. It's not just about these dystopian AGI scenarios that we're thinking of, this technology that doesn't actually exist. There are applications currently being used today, and we should be paying attention to those applications. Yeah? So ethicists during this time were really focused on the ethical issues related to design, and they were focused on, AI in healthcare or AI and autonomous vehicles, that kind of thing. And so then the examples go on and on and on, countless examples of what AI ethicists were uncovering as being incredibly problematic. And so we have, issues like the first driverless car who ended up killing a pedestrian, an individual. And this was one of those moments where then people started to think, oh my goodness, what is this doing to our concept of responsibility, accountability, liability? So again, go back to the puzzle. When you are living in a situation where someone could die and it's unclear who or what is responsible or accountable or liable for that death, things start to crack. Yeah? You start to make some cracks in your vision or your interpretation of what the good life should actually mean. Right? So we started to see all different kinds of examples, and I intentionally have older examples to remind you that we started these conversations years ago, and we still haven't resolved many of the issues. We still haven't resolved what's going to happen in terms of responsibility, accountability, liability. We still haven't resolved things like, I don't know if you remember this, the conversation where Alexa, you remember the days when we thought Alexa was asleep unless you used the word, like to wake it up? And then we found out that it was on all the time. We're like, oh, now people are just like, okay, I guess we're just going to kind of live with it. But it was a big deal back in the day. And that Alexa recorded a conversation between a husband and wife and sent it to a staff member. I don't know if you remember this, but at the time we were all like, no way, this is crazy. And now we've sort of come to take it as like, all right, you know, okay, this is sort of what's happening. But this is still a big deal. We've become sort of desensitized and we've lost face of the idea of having meaningful informed consent. We just kind of let it go. This gets into a different issue when it comes to sort of asymmetry and power as well, but essentially what I'm trying to do is to make the case of different ethical issues related to the different design paradigms that we can think about. So then we get into, again, a plethora of ethical issues. If we're thinking about how the data was sourced. Remember Facebook Cambridge Analytica, that scandal? This is when we started to think about whether or not there was a right or wrong way to actually source data. Is it okay to create a fake survey so that the data that you generate from that survey you can use for political advertising? This was the first time that society was confronted with this issue. Then we think about data collection. Clearview, the company that was scraping Instagram, Twitter, or X, or whatever it is, I don't know what it is now, or TikTok, or I don't know what are like the things that people use, but social media platforms where you have your pictures. Clearview was scraping the internet to take all of these pictures and then to create a facial recognition system which would be used by the United States policing forces. And we had the question, okay, this isn't about sourcing the data, this is about collecting the data. Are we actually saying that it's okay, these kind of secondary uses are okay? That this is not at all why the person posted this information, but we're going to allow it to be scraped by another company and then used for some sort of profit and used in a rather dubious way. And then another stage in the life cycle of AI, this is just the data that we're talking about still, data labeling. Now this is something more recent where OpenAI, there was many stories of the data labeling farms that were being used or created and used in Kenya. Workers paid about approximately $2 a day. And this was for them to label the data so that we would have GPT or the earlier versions of GPT. So the question again was not about how are we collecting the data, how are we sourcing the data, but how is the data being labeled so that we can then ultimately use it for training data. So I'm giving you examples of how the ethics of AI, even when we're just talking about issues of design, there are so many different questions and they can differ depending on the stage of the life cycle that you're talking about. Another way to sort of drive this idea home about the design being sort of the founding factor for the ethical analysis, do you remember when everyone was talking about AI as a black box? And this was, 5 years ago when machine learning was synonymous with AI, that we only knew AI as machine learning. Now when we talk about AI, most of the time we're talking about LLMs or generative AI. But a while ago, that wasn't the case. Anyway, the distinction there being that with this particular model for creating artificial intelligence, or methodology for creating artificial intelligence, you may not know or understand the rules that were generated by the system. So this created this sort of mystery, right? People would say it was kind of magic, and they called it the black box. And then you had ethicists suggesting, okay, what if we were to create explainable AI? To kind of reverse engineer so you understood sort of how a decision was being made or how a prediction was being made by the AI tool. So ethicists were coming up with solutions to what they saw as being a design fault, if you will. Yeah? And then when you put these things together, though, you have the black box of the system, you have like, how is the data being sourced? How is it being collected? Who's doing the labeling of the data? And then we find ourselves in a situation like this, in predictive policing or in policing in general, where we are actually currently in a situation where not in every circumstance, but we might sit back and say, I really don't know. I really don't know how a prediction was made, but I'm going to have to go with this prediction. And it's one thing for, one of the examples that I use in my classes was researchers who were training ML models to try and make a prediction between a wolf and a dog. And they trained the model on copious amounts of data, and then they had new images to try and test. Did the model actually learn? And they thought, wow, this is really great. But they had the black box problem, so they went to try and reverse engineer to make it explainable what parts of the image was the model using in order to arrive at its prediction. And it turned out that the pictures that were used to train, when there was a wolf in the picture, there was usually snow in the picture. And when it was just a dog in the picture, there was no snow. So it learned not the distinctions between the wolf and the dog, but what else was happening in the picture. Yeah, and that's kind of a benign example, like, okay, relax, Amy, it's not so bad. But then when you think about a situation like this, or in a healthcare situation, being able to predict the difference between a benign or a malignant mole, that's a big difference if we can't understand how the decision was arrived at. Okay, so that's first wave AI ethics. Second wave, in response to first wave, focusing on real-world applications, what's going on. And then I started to notice when I was, as mentioned, I was a member of the European Commission high-level expert group, and we were creating the guidelines for trustworthy AI. So I was looking at, is there a way for us to create some kind of procedural trust? Not like, can we make ethical AI, and what does that even mean? But can we create sort of rules of the game for people to be able to trust the way that AI is being made in Europe, predominantly, particularly? And I noticed that, and this is very important, don't get me wrong, but at the time, we were really focused on how to protect the individual. Again, very, very important. But we're forgetting, or not forgetting, we weren't confronted yet with the fact that AI is this massive physical infrastructure. Yeah? And that's easy. I don't know if you know Kate Crawford, Atlas of AI. She wrote a wonderful book about this very topic, and she gives the example of the cloud. Yeah, so the language that we use when we're talking about AI, the model's running on the cloud, my data's on the cloud. You literally don't think of the Earth when you're thinking about the cloud. It's brilliant, really, when you think about it. You don't think about the minerals that are being used. You don't think about the massive data centers. And so then what I'm trying to suggest with the third wave of AI ethics is that we need to not abandon this second wave. We need to pay attention to the applications and to the models and how can we make design fixes. But we also need to take a step back and to look at this massive infrastructure that is artificial intelligence. And when I'm talking about this infrastructure, now here's where I get into the planetary and the global nature. By planetary, I mean that the planet is involved in the making and the using and the disposing of this technology, which I get to in a second. But the global nature, this is something that's really fascinating, because in Germany, in our German federal strategy on AI, we talk about, or the government talks about, AI made in Germany. In Canada, AI made in Canada. In Europe at large, AI made in Europe. Yeah? And when we start to recognize the global chain of AI, where the minerals are coming from, where the mining is happening, where the electronic waste is going, the communities that are involved in the making and the production of AI without having a say in how this happens, we can see that it's actually the global community that is involved in the making and the usage and the disposal of this technology. So it doesn't make any sense to say AI made in Germany, because Germany alone could not make AI, wouldn't have enough of the infrastructure in order to be able to do it. And with that recognition, with understanding the planetary and the global nature, then our ethical analysis has to change. Then our picture of the good life is no longer us in Europe, us in the Western world. It's what does the good life look like with the planet as part of our moral community and with the global community as part of our moral community. So when I talk about sustainable AI, I talk about it in terms of having two branches. And the first branch is AI for sustainability. The second branch is the sustainability of artificial intelligence. Now, AI for sustainability, there is a lot of work being done in this space. There's a lot of not-for-profit organizations that are doing this kind of work. If you go to the website of almost any big tech company, they will have an initiative on AI for good, AI for the planet. They are going to save the world. What's really important, though, to recognize is that the AI that is used for these kind of AI for good initiatives is not the same AI that we're talking about when we're talking about LLMs and generative AI. It's not the same AI that is used most predominantly. There are specialized models that don't have the same environmental footprint. So, okay, AI for good, AI for sustainability, that's great. Of course, we want to have that. But at the same time that we're asking that question and looking at how we can use AI for these good ends, we have to acknowledge an equally important, if not more pressing question, which is, what is the environmental impact of this infrastructure, of this global infrastructure? So just quickly going through some of the ecological footprints, I start with carbon emissions. Yes, I know I said it goes beyond carbon emissions. But it's important to recognize that Emma Struble, she did one of the first studies where she was measuring carbon emissions associated with the training of one small natural language processing model, and she was using one GPU, one computer to do it. She found that through the training of this model, it amounted to approximately 300 metric pounds of carbon dioxide emissions. This is the equivalent of the carbon emissions of 5 cars over the lifetime of the car. Yeah? And so you can say, like, Amy, relax, we can handle 5 cars, right? I get that a lot too. However, that was one GPT being used, that was one small NLP model, one small natural language processing model. This is what she was using. She was using BERT. Okay? The millions of parameters determines how much energy is consumed and then the associated carbon emissions. So we're talking about a small model that was being used, and now we're up in the billions of parameters. So it's not 5 cars anymore, it's exponentially much greater than just the 5 cars. And the problem, though, is that we have no requirement for companies to actually measure this kind of thing, and we have no requirement for transparency. So we're kind of like living in this sort of, we know it's bad, but we just don't know how bad, and there's no obligation for companies to provide us with that information. The second ecological footprint is the mining of precious minerals. So like I was trying to say before, this, when you think of a data center or things running on the cloud, you don't recognize the physical infrastructure. But there is a massive physical infrastructure behind data centers. And in all of these GPUs, you have different minerals, right? Different rare earth minerals or critical minerals that become a part of the chip or become a part of the plastics and whatnot used. Well, where are those minerals coming from? They're not coming from the West. The majority are coming from the global South. So these are the countries where we are requiring them to source us these minerals. And when you think like, okay, all right, this is the globalization of the world, this is how things work. However, since antiquity, we've only been able to have the benefits that we've had in the West because mining has occurred in these slave-like conditions. So in the same way that we used to refer to blood diamonds, we now refer to blood minerals. These are the conditions in which individuals are working in order for us to have the pieces of the physical infrastructure that we need. So not only is it horrific working conditions, but also when you take these toxins from the planet, you end up disturbing the equilibrium of the soil. And so you end up creating new toxins or leaving other toxins into the earth. And this has an impact on the water supply and the ability for the mining communities surrounding to actually have viable agriculture, for them to be able to have food. The last ecological footprint that I want to mention is electronic waste. And so again, going back to this, it's this vicious cycle when you think about it, that we are taking from the planet, and we're doing it in a way that exploits both people and the planet. We're taking from the planet so that we can create this physical infrastructure that we use, that we in the Western world use. And then when we're done with it, and the chip or GPU has a lifespan anywhere between 2 and 4 years at the moment. So what happens to the electronic waste? Yes, we have conventions and treaties to try and minimize the export of electronic waste to global South countries, but it's not working. And then we find ourselves in a situation where not only is it aesthetically sad to actually see this, but once again, the toxins that are in this electronic waste sink into the soil and the water, further contaminating the soil and the water, making it difficult for the individuals living in these communities to have any kind of well-being. right? Going back to our puzzle pieces. Okay, so I can go on and on environmental injustices, the water consumption, the water used to cool the data centers. Data centers are being placed in the coldest places on the planet in order to keep them as cool as possible, but then we are drastically changing the temperature in those places. Biodiversity, what happens when you have a data center or multiple data centers? What is happening to the soil and to the earth around those places? We don't know. We don't have the research yet. Okay, so what now? Yeah, I know that's such like a downer of a conversation. I usually, when I start, I say the ethicist normally has that reputation of being the one in the room who's just like, don't do it, it's so bad. But I'm trying not to do that. But you probably don't get that impression from this talk. But, but seriously, I mean it. Okay, so what now? So I do believe, and how I started this, where I said 5 years ago people laughed at me, and now I am consulting with ministries and being able to speak to people who are so curious and interested and passionate about this topic. I know things will change. I do know that. We need regulation. We need things like environmental impact assessments. We need companies obliged to measure, track, companies obliged to use renewable energy sources. We need to involve the Global South in terms of how do we make sure that we are not exploiting for our own benefits, right? At what point will the scales become even, or at least closer to even, where we can say that the AI for sustainability, we can actually justify it because we're doing so much in terms of the sustainability of AI, in terms of reusing the heat from data centers and things like that. I know, last slide. And so my call to action, as you go through the next couple of days, and you'll be listening to so many talks. And again, I think it's good for us to also be interested, curious, and passionate about the use of AI for good and the use of AI for sustainability. But I would invite you to think about the other side of the coin, to think about, at what point can we say AI for good when there's so many other things for us to think about that might actually outweigh any kind of good use? Okay, so thank you. With that, thanks for your attention. Sorry I went over time, and I'm really excited to continue the discussion with the roundtable. Thanks.
No, thank you. Perfect timing.
Ah,
yes,
okay.
Please. You can take the second seat, as I will take the first one, if that's okay with you. Thank you so much, Professor van Wynsberghe, for this very interesting presentation. It's probably the most perfect introduction for our roundtable. You can stay right here with me, and I will have more people come and join us, if that's okay with you. Our next guest co-founded and leads since its inception in 2024 the International Computation and AI Network based at ETH Zürich. Maybe we'll just say ICAIN, as we only have 50 minutes for our discussion, but she will tell you all about it. She has a strong record at the intersection of AI governance, digital diplomacy, and global partnerships. Paris, Bern, and the United Nations in Vienna have seen her served as a career diplomat for the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, where she helped establish the Digital Foreign Policy Division and shaped Switzerland's international strategy on digital governance and cyber security. A big round of applause for Nina Frey. I first met our next guest in 2024 when she received an EPFL Alumni Award in recognition of her unique contribution to the international success of the school. She is the head of Innovation Unit at the Swiss Data Science Center, a joint venture between EPFL and ETH Zürich again, where scientists collaborate with Swiss companies and organizations to adopt data-driven solutions and integrate data science in their decision-making processes. She's also an InnoSwiss Innovation Council member, promoting novelty and value creation in the Swiss economic landscape. Please welcome Silvia Quarteroni. And last but not least, we will be joined by the man who told me on the phone, I'm very honored because Silvia Quarteroni was one of my students, full professor and director of the Distributed Computing Lab in the School of Computer and Communication Sciences here at EPFL, where he started as a postdoctoral researcher. He was appointed to the computer science faculty in 1999. He has been affiliated with École des Mines of Paris, the Commissariat à l'énergie atomique of Saclay, or even the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He lived in Silicon Valley during the internet bubble, which he says gives him keys to understand better what's happening today with AI. He's part of the team that developed Anyway systems, the software we'll be talking about later, which enables users to download large open source language models and use them locally. Please welcome Rachid Gharaoui. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you very much for being with us tonight. If you agree, I'd like to start with a question that may seem very simple, but will enable us to establish the scope of our discussion. Aimee, you said like black box, massive infrastructure that we forgot about. So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about AI? Rachid, when we talked about it on the phone, you immediately mentioned music.
Music, yes. AI is like music for the youth, la musique des jeunes. This is something that goes over time. When I was a kid, la musique des jeunes, the music of youth, was maybe rock and roll. And I think today that's not musique des jeunes anymore. So in the years of Vivaldi, classical music was called musique des jeunes. So AI today is ChatGPT. It's completing sentences, essentially, like WhatsApp does. In a few years, that will be something else. So I think it's important to recall that this is a surprise thing that we see, and then we say, wow, and when the wow effect goes on, then we move to something else. So eventually, AI will be completely different. What is important is probably what our vice president said earlier. AI is mathematics plus machines. And I think understanding that usually help us demystify a little bit these things.
Do you want to react? What is exactly AI? What are we talking about?
I mean, so I just talked for a while, so. Oh, I was going to say, the way that I address it is that it is this, it's trying to replicate human intelligence in a machine form. That's AI, the sort of umbrella of artificial intelligence, trying to take something, and then what is human intelligence, but trying to replicate this, and then you have different methodologies for this, good old-fashioned AI, symbolic reasoning, machine learning, neural networks, and so those are the methodologies of artificial intelligence, but really it's the pursuit of trying to create human-like intelligence in machine form.
Sylvia?
I would even go a bit backwards and saying, artificial intelligence is a very poorly chosen expression to represent the simulation and reproduction of a human behavior that is sometimes misinterpreted as intelligence. But human intelligence, in my understanding, is something else.
And Sylvia, when we talked on the phone, we talked about life cycles of AI. Not every step of the life cycle of an AI consumes the same amount of energy, right?
Yeah, I think it's very important to realize, I mean, probably many people in this room already do, that when we use artificial intelligence applications, we have a different carbon footprint than when we train those large language models that were mentioned earlier, which is in a way a reassuring thought, but of course, that shouldn't let us underestimate the impact that those trainings generate. But let's say more generally, when we come to an artificial intelligence model like an LLM, a large language model, that's only a part of the trip. You know, you have the data collection that happened before. Data was aggregated on some infrastructure, and then you have the training of this model, and then you have the serving of this model, so making it available to users, and then you have the scaling up of this model and the disposal as well. So it's a journey indeed, and different steps have different impacts.
I think it's the right timing for Rashid to talk about Anyway system that I talked about in your presentation. So this software that you developed and shows that AI needs fewer resources than we think.
So as Sylvia just pointed out, there is a big part which is inference, how to use these models. In fact, the small part is how you train the model. But the big part is how to use it, the big part of energy consumption, of machine consumption, etc. And people believe or misbelieve that in order to use a model, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., you need huge resources. And I think that's wrong. You need huge resources if you want to serve millions of requests per second. But if you are a hospital, an administration, a university, interested in serving, let's say, a few hundred requests per second, then I think we can show that only few machines with few GPUs, they can even be old, can run the biggest model on Earth. And I think this is something, again, that we can understand by remembering that this is all about algorithms and machines and their optimization techniques. So the system that you just mentioned is a system that enables you to deploy on few machines some of the biggest models that are out there and use them in, of course, frugal manner because you are just using your old machines.
We're now focusing on AI's energy consumption, but as we saw in your presentation, Aimee, for you, AI's energy consumption is just one piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And what I was trying to hit on was the mining of rare earth and critical minerals and how those are necessary parts of this physical infrastructure, and the way that we get those is awful. The way that those are sourced from the planet is awful. And then, I mean, you can be an ecocentrist where you believe that the planet, the Earth, has an intrinsic value, and so we can't treat it as this resource, right? So indigenous perspectives, they believe that the mountain is an uncle, the river is a relative, and so you cannot treat the planet like that. That's one way of looking at it. But you could also look at it in terms of, in order for us to be able to sustain life on Earth, we need to slow down with the extraction, with the level of extraction that we're talking about. Okay, so that's the planet. But then if you think about the living conditions that so many millions of people are living in, so that we have the convenience of something like GPT, is it really worth it?
Nina, I'm sure this echoes to you because, Nina, for you, sustainable AI is above all AI to which we guarantee fair and wide access to all, right?
I need...
Oh, yeah, it works. No, I think...
Oh, it works.
Yeah.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I think maybe we can, because when we talk about sustainability and environment, obviously the focus on sustainability is more on the environmental impact. But if you look at the sustainability from the SDGs, like the sustainability goals, many of the goals include other aspects, right? So the famous slogan of "Leave no one behind," or a right to economic growth, or a right to education. So there's also are all SDGs as well. And I think where I could maybe add some to the discussion is more on these aspects, because we had, and you mentioned it, I used to be a Swiss diplomat, so obviously the main task of a diplomat is to help portray the country or defend the interests of the countries abroad. And I happened to be back in headquarters when the whole ChatGPT wave hit the planet, and I was, as you mentioned it as well, setting up this new division on digital foreign policy. So the Swiss government already in 2020 established this strategy that looked, you can think of it as the digital space as a new continent, right? And when then after the ChatGPT moment, if you looked a bit into the whole debate that was going on very quickly, and still today, you see it's mainly talking about two countries. Mainly a tiny bit about the EU because of the regulation approach, but our country and 193 others are actually not playing a big role. We're only consumer sides. And so this very unequal point of view was obviously disturbing me as a diplomat. But we then launched, together with the EPFL and ETH and many partners in Africa and Europe, all academians, we launched this ICAIN network with this simple task or approach that we tried to give like a contribution to a more equitable access to AI research. So if I do talks, usually with slides, I use another slide. Your slide that you mentioned about the minerals, where they come from in Africa, I usually have another slide equal with the African continent, and then you see, and it would be fun to put it together actually, is you have roughly like 9 data centers. Maybe but very, very few. And you mentioned some reasons like the heat and like the weather conditions, etc. But like the access to compute that you actually need to train whatever AI that you want to train is very restricted. It lies in the hand of a very, very few companies. And it's also very expensive. So there's studies that show, for instance, in Africa, researchers have to pay up to 30% more to cloud credit access than, for instance, here in Europe or in the US. And that's only about the pay. We're not even talking about where the data is hosted, where the data is going, like sovereignty questions, etc. Switzerland's in very privileged positions at the moment because they have an own public supercomputer, very powerful. We have amazing expertise and like capabilities, like here and in other universities. And many countries or organizations don't have that access. So we try to broaden this access and also allow more collaborations between partners from different countries. So to kind of create your own culturally embedded models that are actually also usable in the cultural context that you need.
And yeah, Aimee, you said during the presentation, we need regulation, right? So does that make an echo for you, Sylvia? How do we do that now?
Well, this is a very, very delicate topic because I think there are many interests that collide when we talk about regulations. First of all, the whole idea of regulating a technology versus a practice or a process is something that may appear as debatable, right? Because for example, you can regulate the way that people drive, but not necessarily electric self-driving cars, right? So where do you put the bar? And I think the big challenge of regulation is not to disrupt processes that work and have an equilibrium, like you were mentioning earlier, while at the same time accounting for the novelty that technology brings, and while at the same time accounting for usually a geopolitical situation in which different, let's say, political entities may or may not regulate differently, and what impact does that have on your own ecosystem. And to make this a bit more concrete, I mean, in many situations when we interact with companies that partner with my center, the SDSC, we have people who really feel the competition on an industrial practice from abroad. Switzerland exports a lot, right? So if Switzerland regulates a lot, then economically that could be detrimental, because then the Swiss company using a highly regulated AI might suffer from lack of competitiveness compared to the outside world. But of course, when you have these kind of discussions, then there's a lot of potential opposition, which is totally understandable in terms of, regulations is, I mean, we want the good life, right? We have to regulate because we have our picture of what is good independently of the economical counterpart and the implications.
Rachid, as you develop technologies, did you face this kind of problems with regulation?
No, not yet. I hope we never. Somebody said, I think they might be wrong now, but and many people know that the US invent, China copy, and Europe regulate. I really hate this picture, and I really would like that we in Europe, we do invent and then we regulate what we invent. It's much easier to regulate what we invent. Regulating ChatGPT today, I think it's hopeless.
Yeah, Nina, for you, the problem is that today. AI developments is in the end of private companies, laboratories, mostly in the US and China, right? You want to react to that?
Yeah, but if I can say something about the regulation as well, because I think it's, for me at least, very humble mind. It's always helpful to think about like the concrete application. So for me, I'm obviously one of the people who believes very much in the power that AI can help as an instrument. I'm a very white skin, so I need to go to the doctor to check my skin. You know, what's it called? The skin doctor?
Dermatologist.
Thank you. Skin doctor somehow easier. And I was deliberately looking for last year, like, is there like a skin doctor? I live in Zurich. Is there a skin dermatologist that uses AI? There's very few. I actually found one. I went there. He has this huge machine. Like, I had to pay extra. Obviously, the insurances don't pay for it. But it helped me to gain trust that because it doesn't replace him, okay? It's just, I did like these photos, and while the algorithm was doing what it did, he did the very classical checkup that he would do, but then he had like an assistant, an additional opinion. So regulational point, as a consumer, I obviously want to trust that the algorithm is somehow trustworthy, the same way that the doctor, I trust that he went to med school and that somehow someone actually tests that he did go to med school, he just didn't put out the thing. So this kind of approach helps me to think from a consumer perspective, I would like to be regulated. It's the same if the police uses AI for whatever they do, or the lawmakers, or courtrooms. And I think that's just more helpful if you look at it as a more sectorial approach than horizontal. By the way, I think that's also how the Swiss government tries to do it, but I'm obviously not speaking here as the Swiss government, but I think it's helpful also for the individual to understand what regulation actually means. Yeah.
Rachid, you told me in your opinion the first step towards ethical AI is to master the technology we use.
I said that on the phone?
Yes.
Okay,
Do you regret it?
Yes, tell me.
It seems that I said many things. No, but to some extent, again, the first step to regulate indeed is to master what we do. I really believe in that, especially in these technologies, because, for example, I don't know if we all do use Netflix, but we use variants of Netflix. But we don't realize what algorithms are behind Netflix, the way they propose to us this or that movie, or maybe even in the future, they will cook movies for us because they will see we like these kinds of movies. Maybe I will see Rambo 27 because when I was a kid, I liked Rambo. So the models behind those systems are very, very hidden. So it's not clear to bridge the gap between the end consumer who is using a product that we feel is funny and then something fundamental. That's why I really believe regulation is great, but it's so difficult with IT because the distance between the models, the AI, and the consumer is not clear. The responsibilities are not clear, and therefore it's very difficult. Hence, the alternative, let's master our own technology, and there maybe we can try to do what we really believe is good for our citizens.
Sorry. So is that okay? Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, but it's a really privileged position that we're sitting in to be able to say that, right? So if there was someone from Brazil, Ghana, here in the room, and we were saying, let's master the technology and then we can worry about regulating, they'd say like, what? That's the other way. That's the flip side. That's the flip side of the approach that we should be looking at. Part of mastering the technology is to regulate it. Part of mastering the technology is to be able to say, like, essentially, we are in the middle of a big social experiment right now. We don't know. I brought up sycophancy before. We have no idea how this is going to impact society at large. We know that young adults are committing suicide. We know that people are marrying these things. But we are essentially guinea pigs in the middle of this experiment. How is that allowed? I understand that the power of innovation, but when at the moment we have these two choices between move fast and break things, right? That's it. Move fast and break things, or let's protect our fundamental human rights. Let's create technology based on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm going to go with the other one, rather than letting innovation run wild, mastering the technology and then thinking about what happens afterwards. I'm trying to also play devil's advocate. Let's get a panel going here. Yeah?
She wants fight. Okay.
No, you interrupt us if you want to go.
Just to react.
Of course. I also want to.
I would do that just like
We let the man
ChatGPT.
interrupt, yeah.
Great.
Thank you. But then you're also supposed to say, would you like me to elaborate on that point?
Please, Nina.
No, I think your point is you're basically, and I agree with the guinea pigs, by the way, but that's mainly with Gen AI. Like, and I mean, Sam Altman even said it. Like they put out ChatGPT because they wanted to get some feedbacks from us for the GPT-4. So I agree on that. But we talked about all of us before, like that AI is in very different aspects, and so I don't think that applies. Again, I'm using the medical example. Oh, yeah. So I agree with the large scale LLMs, but I wouldn't agree on the other topics. And you mentioned other countries. I agree they have different demands because it even starts with having connectivity in many. So yes.
I would actually say that the healthcare space, I would say that the healthcare space, though, is incredibly important to have this regulation, to have FDA approvals at the basic minimum. But then we get into a conversation about de-skilling surgeons and practitioners, about what does it mean to be an expert in the healthcare space if this technology is not just a tool that you're using, but becomes a part of the practice, becomes an expert itself, and then you start to second guess your decisions. Because you think, oh, what? Then I would say that we need to have regulatory authorities. Okay, then we can take away my regulation thing, but then we should have authorities, bodies who are checking in on how quickly is this moving.
Sylvia.
And I think to both your points, and actually your point as well, I think it's very important to make sure that these authorities, these experts who are supposed to perform the task of regulating or not and determine the rules are really knowledge matter experts. For example, artificial intelligence, I mean, the concept was born in the 50s. We have applications of AI which are the latest and greatest that everybody talks about, which have their complexities and their black boxes and all of their challenges because of the sycophantic behavior and everything. You have good old decision trees, which are a machine learning algorithm that is extremely explainable, and maybe it's not even considered AI anymore, but it's one of the things that people use in the industry. And so, I mean, being even aware of the complexity of AI. I mean, AI is like saying, I don't know, literature. I mean, you have Shakespeare and you have Bukowski, right? So, I mean, people should know that there are different types of things that you can develop in different applications and regulate accordingly, and not just making a bunch of regulations regarding AI in general, because this wouldn't serve the purposes of the communities, I believe.
Yep. If we go back to AI for good and sustainable AI, Sylvia, you were telling me that sustainable AI has an impact on AI for good. Maybe you can tell us the difference and why is the impact?
Well, I'm definitely no expert on the topic. We have much better suited people to answer this. What I can say is that I think that many artificial intelligence methods and applications can go and do go practically, industrially, in the direction of sustainability, which is a good thing, which is something that is valuable for society because, for example, we reduce energy consumption, dependency on imports of energy. We reduce we have a better environmental impact, let's say. And it's very important to realize that there are many artificial intelligence approaches that go into this direction. And I think that it's very important to create the business incentives for these, because sadly, the industry in general, and even probably public sector, they have KPIs and bottom lines to satisfy. And if we can prove that there is a value that is also measurable and measurable in a monetary way in using these approaches, well, then we win, right? Because we satisfy our moral challenges, we satisfy the business objectives, and we have a positive good impact. But of course, many good things don't have an obvious economic, let's say, benefit, and that's where the gray zone, I would say, starts.
And on those positive approach, there's another use for AI that you both told me about, Rashid and Nina, and that's weather forecasting. Can you tell us about? You told me, Nina, you just out from Météo Suisse that you visited like days ago.
not hours, but no. I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think where you see probably some parallels with what happened with LLMs, right? So. In weather forecasting, which, by the way, were the classical users of supercomputing centers, because they were like physical calculations. I'm sure many people here know much more than I do about how to do it. But they're switching now to also use machine learning in the weather forecasting globally. Not really, it's in Europe happening the same as in others. And there, if you look at like the map of who already has or is developing those models, it's exactly the same, basically the same private companies that also developed LLMs. And obviously, weather forecasting is not just us thinking, oh, should I wear a scarf or not? Should I bring a parapluie? Umbrella. Thank you. But it's of utmost importance for early warnings, for farming decisions, etc., etc. So I think also there, it's very important that we are alert, that we don't create the same dependencies that are happening in other model development. So we're starting to discuss, because one of the pilot use cases that a professor from Kenya is doing with another member of ICAIN is exactly on weather forecasting in Kenya. And we are now also in discussions exactly with the experts from Météo Suisse and WMO. And just, if you allow me, because that came to my mind before, because about the explainability, because the colleagues at Météo Suisse told me they are starting to look into that, but for them, like the recommendations they do are, for instance, to the planes, right? So for them, it's of utmost importance to understand the model's recommendations. And it would be very helpful to have experts that do like research on explainability of the models. But those experts, they don't only need to be machine learning experts, they also very much need domain expertise from, like, I don't know what you study to do weather forecasts. Physics, probably, climatology. And I think that's so important to find this sweet spot between domain experts and machine learning experts, or to actually put them together. Yeah, so I kind of went a bit away from your questions.
No, that's perfect.
I think that's something I also find important, because very often when we talk about AI, we only think about machine learning scientists. But I think it's very important that domain experts also become interested and start to collaborate.
And they bring the problems, right, and the opportunities. It's not the technologists who bring, they bring solutions to problems that may not even exist. But if you start with a problem, you're definitely going to deliver something that has an impact.
Yeah.
There is this small city in Morocco, and this city usually lacks water. Every year it's a disaster. You have to struggle to get water. And this year, 40 people died because they did not realize that a big storm will come. And people were basically selling goods in a very, very small street of that city, and they didn't realize that this quantity of water will happen, and 40 people died. So this is a problem that mathematically is extremely difficult, and only AI, in whatever form it will take, will help us predict a weather forecast. So this is an example where...
Sorry.
Yeah.
But I have to say this. So talking about meteorology or being able to predict the weather, don't you think that it's fascinating that we're living at a time right now? Where the weather is becoming so much more unpredictable because of the climate crisis. So we're going to look for a technological fix to something that we have gotten ourselves into this situation.
Yeah, but as you pointed out earlier...
I don't... Okay, but wait. Sorry, and one other thing. And I interrupted you, so I'm sorry. And the other thing, too, is so this community in Morocco, or this city in Morocco that you were talking about, and they didn't know that the storm was coming. So I hear your example. But then when I'm doing research on indigenous communities, they know when to set fires to the forest so that they can control and make sure that the forest fires don't overcome the communities, right? They know how to take care of the land because they live, as one with the land. We don't need a technology to do that for us. We need to pay attention to what's going on in the land. Yeah, I know. I'm not saying let's all live in little whatever.
No,
but there are other ways than technology to do it. Sorry.
Can I answer?
Yeah. Come on.
I don't see myself going to those people. Some of them are in my family, and tell them, hey guys, this is your fault if you have planted the trees the way your grandfathers did it, and if the Chinese didn't do that, and if the North Korean didn't do that, then you will not have the flooding. That doesn't work. People need a solution. We need to tell them, be careful, tomorrow there will be a storm, period. We cannot tell them and make them feel guilty because the way they plant the trees or the way they build their cities is this or that. Yeah. This is a clear problem, and you were advocating for solutions for the Global South. The Global South sometimes needs clear information about weather forecast or how the dams should be built or the way this is reality.
But then we get into evaluation of knowledge, that our scientific knowledge is superior to their indigenous knowledge. Then we're talking, that's a whole other conversation. Also, remember when we had information about Hurricane Katrina and the people in New Orleans weren't warned early enough? So sometimes we have the information and the information isn't properly given out to the communities who will suffer from it.
But are you suggesting, I agree that indigenous people have knowledge that we have all forgotten. But are you suggesting that we should just not use? It's the same as if you would say, I have a headache, and there would be ibuprofen I know I could take, but I don't because there's other approaches. Because I also don't think it's either or, and I agree with you that you should also use it.
Yeah, but that analogy though about taking medicine in North America, where I come from, we have a problem with super germs, super bugs who are antibacterial resistant. Am I saying this right? Yeah, that they're resistant to antibiotics, right? So we lost, right? We've already created these super bugs because we took the pills too much, because we just thought, okay, it's Western medicine, let's do that. So that's in terms of that analogy. I'm not suggesting that we should all become indigenous communities. Actually, maybe. Wouldn't that be for an interesting conversation? But I'm not suggesting that here and now. What I am suggesting is, right, it's not an either or, but we are pushing so hard for the technology and we are ignoring other possibilities. It's AI, and we're ignoring the fact that there are other forms of knowledge. The epistemological traditions out there, we can learn something from them, even if it's just slow down, ruste.
So if AI for good is not sustainable, can't we do it? Or can we do it side by side?
Sustainable AI and AI for good?
Yeah.
So I would say AI for good for me brings up different things. The sustainability question is really this looking at the of and the for dimension. I would suggest that there's a moment in time where the two come together and you only talk about sustainable AI when you are developing it in this sustainable way and you are using it for sustainable ends, like prediction of natural disasters so that you can protect the communities. But then we have to figure out, what does sustainability of AI mean? It means reusing the heat generated from the data centers, minimizing in order to minimize the water consumption of those data centers, the most efficient models possible. It means, do you know the phone, Fairphone? It's a Dutch phone company. They created their own procurement chain for gold because they didn't believe in the mining infrastructure. They made every single part of that phone replaceable so that you didn't have to buy a new phone when a piece of your phone broke. That's innovation. That's mastering the technology, I would say. What if we could create GPUs in the same sort of thinking? Or we have companies saying, we're going to have a new procurement chain for lithium, for example, where we don't dry up the lakes on the planet. That is sustainable AI. We're not there yet, but I think we can get there.
Sylvia, you wanted to react before?
I just was running, given the turn that this conversation has taken, what do we do in the meantime then? Because there's a lot of, I believe, really valuable opportunity for AI-based technologies to bring, impact, not just, monetary impact, but also societal impact.
Yeah.
So what do we do with that? I don't want to get back to the weather thing, but I just want to say that not all extreme weather events are determined by humankind, although it is proven that humans impacted on the weather and climate. But we cannot just say, okay, let's punish ourselves because we created a monster and refrain from activating it, and therefore passing out on many opportunities in all sorts of fields because there's a bad component to them. Like, what do we do while we wait for the cobalt sourcing AI in Morocco?
Yeah. We, first of all, I would say like a perfect kind of narrative is the Frankenstein story, the modern Prometheus, right? When you create the monster, the technology, and you abandon it and let it run wild and you don't take responsibility for it, then what happens? So I say we like reshape the modern Prometheus and we say, we've made it. Now let's take responsibility for it. And that means, I would say the start would be the environmental impact assessment. And it was actually the United States who suggested this 2 years ago. It was not ratified. But still, that's the kind of thing that should be on the table. We just start by assessing.
Describing the data, basically, already. Just measuring, you mean?
Energy consumption, associated carbon emissions, use of renewable energy sources, specialized models versus the LLMs, the large models, but then also big tech or at least large companies who have a stake in the game, they should also be required to do restoration efforts. So if we can't fix the mines, what if companies are obliged to do some kind of restoration efforts where they are replanting, where they are helping the soil, right? You know how with farming, I'm not in agriculture. Crop rotation. Yeah, exactly. So what if companies were obliged? That's starting small, but it's a start, no?
I think we have to add more voices to our conversation as the clock is ticking, and I promised that you could ask some questions. So there are 2 microphones. One is over there on your left, my right, and one is there. You can just line up behind the microphone, and then we'll take your question. So you can just you can come here.
Yeah. Does this one work?
Yeah, this one works. So we're going to begin here. Hi, good evening.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I really like many of the things. Several of you said some more than others, but just two little comments. Technology is generally neutral, so it just allows us to accelerate whatever we are doing. So if we're going in the wrong direction, then accelerating is not a good idea. So as long as society is going in the generally bad direction, we should use less technology. That's a kind of a general thing. But more to the point of what we are discussing, the issue is not so much better models, better hardware, better mining, better standards, etc. The issue is much more of scale. How do we limit the scale of energy we use, the material throughput, the scale of various human activities? So we can't regulate every single thing, but regulating the scale is the most obvious thing that any society that wants to survive must do. So how do we do that? And what would that mean for AI? Obviously, it would limit the size. So if we have X energy, per capita, per whatever, then what part of that do we want to allocate to AI? And that will solve many of the problems. Not all of them, but many of them. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that would be a good place to start. It may not solve issues of values, it may not solve issues of trust, etc., which is a separate problem. But that would be perhaps one of the most impactful directions of action. So whoever wants to comment on that, I would really appreciate.
Thank you. Yes, Silvia?
Maybe I can comment on this. So, yeah, a couple of things that you mentioned. I mean, I don't think everybody necessarily agrees on those, and I'm not the expert to say otherwise. For example, many ethicists think that technology is by definition not neutral. I tend to think it's neutral, but that's my opinion. But coming to your later point, I think it's a matter of culture. I mean, not everybody is aware that maybe ChatGPT is not the best tool to calculate a sum. Maybe they can use another tool. Not every industry player around Switzerland and elsewhere is aware that they don't need to display a big muscle flex and use LLMs to solve each and every problem that they have. And sometimes, actually most of the times, by the way, in the industry-grade solutions that are based on AI machine learning, they can run on a laptop. Being able to choose because you have learned and you're a discerning user and customer and initiator is a very powerful thing, because if you scale it up to several people, communities, decision makers, policymakers, then you can have basically an impact on, you know, do I go greedy with the LLMs, or do I do something that is a bit more, you know, ninja focused that brings value to my business, and everybody wins again. So I think that's a starting point.
Thank you so much. We're going to make one left, one right. There was one. Yeah, please come to the microphone. Thank you, Sylvia. No, yeah, just there.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, it's not really a question, but maybe a comment, or just let's start from another assumption, because, okay, just to conflict of interest, I used Claude before I came to just check what's for example, what about for Shigari, what is the Byzantine paradox, the systems you're working on and the math behind it. And Claude did that for me on my iPhone. So I'm kind of hypocritical, but okay, that's my conflict of interest. So I don't think that AI is going to disappear. And I, as a French indigenous, I'm very happy to use it. And I'm sure that people in Morocco are very happy to use it as well. And because it's so easy and the PDF is so perfect and so on, so you got my point. The most disturbing point is the exertions of resources and what you call the blood minerals. And this is really disturbing. And really, it took me 3 years before I used LLMs, because I was very shocked, and I knew I read the papers about, and this is very well documented, and this is very, very disturbing. But I don't think there is a real, the way with the current, the nowadays economical system, I don't think there is a very real solution. So I'm just it's again obvious. I'm just going to offer an experiment of thought. Let's start from an assumptions. We cannot stop that, and for now there is no new chemistry to make. There's no to make this kind of chipset from another kinds of for example, with carbon you can recycle easy. That should be great, but for now we need minerals, and the amount of energy the chips consume is very, 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 very high compared to the theoretical amount of energy. The minimum amount of energy that is needed to shift from 0 to 1. Anyway, so the experiment of thought is just why Europe, and Switzerland is Europe, why couldn't we restrict this technology to military application? Because it's not for civilian. civilians are going to wait that. We just do whatever. That's not for them. That's not for us. That should be restricted to civilian, to military, and critical application. Sorry,
Okay, so
I hope I'm making sense. This is my point. I'm just going to be very, very provocative. Like in the Soviet Union, just if we're running out of resource, the economic is collapsing. Sorry, I'm French. There is a bias, and so what's the best way? So you have to restrict the resource consumption, and we have to focus on what is very important. So energy. Electricity networks and power grids and military. So,
if you allow me, so your question is, should we talked about regulation, but should we restrict the technology to some domains, like to, for example, military, or should we take that away from civilian? That's the question.
Yes, I'm the lawyer advocate, but this is I know that, but. Just shift the paradigm. You can't regulate, so what should we do? So just go to military and just forbid those technology to civilian because they're going to waste it.
Thank you so much. Do you want to react to that?
Well, I think, so there's two things I would react to. The first one is this idea of taking it away from civilian usage and having it in a military application. So I stay away from the military context because that's a whole other discussion. But Australia or New Zealand, who decided that children under the age of 16, Australia,
yep,
were no longer allowed to use social media platforms. I thought that was an interesting move. Similar to what you're saying, to take it away, but I see it as having a kind of driver's license, that okay, don't get me wrong, it's not like drinking or driving, but it has serious implications for children interacting with this technology. And so to say you need to be of a certain level of maturity, you need to be able to control some of your instincts, then you can have access to this technology. I think that's a really interesting move. But I think it would be too authoritarian, if you will, to restrict civilians from having any access to the technology as well. Then we start talking about a different political climate.
That was an experiment of thought, but those technologies are rooted in the military. So that was my last comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We're going to let our guests respond. Thank you, Rachid.
Yeah, I think the suggestion is great, and I have been fighting with my kids for many years to prevent them from using phones, and I like what Australia did, and Macron is actually also proposing the same. But now this stands on a very interesting technological problem. How do you recognize that the person has a certain age? And actually who is behind the screen? And this is a very important problem, and I think there are many labs at EPFL working on this digital identity responsibility. So this is something where, again, algorithms, mathematics could help identify the person, try to restrict the usage, maybe not for all civilians, but let's start with the kids.
Mathematics is the solution. Yes, Nina.
I think how you began the panel was about, you asked the colleagues to define AI, right? And I think many put out that AI is not equal LLMs. There was a very interesting article, I think, in the New York Times in October-ish last year, where a journalist he did like a self-experiment. For 48 hours, he tried to be without AI, okay? So he did define in the beginning, you can Google it, New York Times, 48 hours without AI. So he defined it to a certain extent, so that if in the whole supply chain of, for instance, clothes production or food production, there was an element of AI that goes beyond LLMs, he wouldn't use it or he wouldn't consume it. And he was literally, I think he was in New York, so he actually then was eating plants, okay? Because he apparently didn't find a way to buy food that didn't have an element in the whole supply chain of AI in it. The same for the clothes. He was wearing his grandfather's clothes or something like that. So this little story just to say, it's so broadly interwoven with our everyday life, at least in the West, that it's difficult for me to imagine like how you can restrict it. So again, you could talk about sectors, and yes, military AI is something, especially those days. I think it's probably we shouldn't talk about it here. Yeah.
We decided not to. There was one last question here. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you for organizing this. I'm a master's student in AI, and I've always hoped that there would be more sessions like this. I have a question. So Professor Rachit mentioned that AI is like the music of youth. Professor, I disagree a bit. I feel like maybe reggaeton is the music of the youth. AI has become more like a drug, because I talk to my friends and I listen to them. And the youth of today have a very different life than youth of maybe 20 years ago. We have grown up with despair. First COVID, then wars around the world. A lot of my friends, a lot of people I talk to are very lonely. And then AI comes in, and it is having, it has a very big psychological impact, more than we are noticing. So how do we assess that? Because a lot of the conversation I hear about AI sort of leaps away from that and talks about the customers of AI, which are generally older than the people who AI might be affecting the most, who are young adults, for example. And another question, if it's okay, is Jamie Dimon. It's a different question. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, he recently said that AI could lead to a big job shift, something similar to what happened after neoliberalization policies of Thatcher and Reagan, and then movement of manufacturing to the east. And similarly, AI can lead to a lot of job losses. So AI is going to affect a lot of people who are not even part of the supply chain. So how do is there any way to decrease the acceleration of what we are doing and pause and reflect and move forward? Because it seems like if I talk about myself, when I was in my bachelor's, I read about CNN and I had an aha moment. I really like the technology. I like studying it. I like reading about it. But the more I work on it, sometimes I feel like there's less hope.
Thank you so much. So 2 parts of the question. First one on psychological effects, and second one on the speed, the scale.
Yeah, I apologize for using the analogy music of the youth. It was just to say that what used to be called AI 20 years ago is not AI today. We can replace music of the youth by drugs and marijuana and coke and whatever.
Thank you. So, someone else wants to react? You said at the beginning of your presentation, you talked a bit about the effect of an AI that speaks to us, like always saying like, oh, that's a wonderful idea, so nice, everything. That maybe is a bit linked with this psychological effect.
Yeah, I would say, so I think it's really good for your generation to speak up about these things, because it's one thing for me to have a platform and to say we should be worried about this sycophantic interaction and that we should be studying it, we should be thinking more about it. But like you just said, the way that you grew up was different from how I grew up. So I don't quite have the same visceral experience that you do. So you should form communities where you can talk about this. You can talk about the way you described it, that you've lived through trauma after trauma with COVID and wars and the climate crisis. I think that would be really good for policymakers to hear, for researchers to hear, so that we can start to say, I mean, you would think that we would pay attention with the suicides of young adults as a result of their interaction with these different LLMs. But there needs to be more of an active movement. So I think your voice is really important, and you should keep speaking up.
So you started. Oh, sorry, Nina.
No, and thank you for the thing about like the loneliness. I think it's not only news, by the way. I think it's a general problem. Maybe in West, where we have less families. And I must say, I like to chat with my AI friend as well. So I know that even from personal experience. I'm also a mother, so I think it's helpful to hear that as well in terms of as parents, how we talk to kids. That goes a bit in your idea about the AI driver's license. I think that's where we have to go both from users, at every age, by the way, to be aware, to know what it's good to use for, what it's not good to use for. I mean, it goes even into what kind of data you share, you know? So it's a whole range of, I think maybe of, I don't know what the right word for is, other than, I mean, education is maybe a bit too broad. I like the driver's license or the license approach, that you need to know for whatever tool you use, you need to kind of know what it's good for when it's not good for. That's not a helpful reflection to you, but just think it's happening at the moment to everyone, and even like regulators need time to understand something, to see how to actually govern something.
Sylvia, I was wondering, as you were a student, and did you face some kind of these challenges while you were studying? Like,
I'm way too old for this. I mean, I grew up with Nirvana and Discman, so no. But what I want to say, but
no, I meant just because you did the same studies.
I was just joking. But actually, what I want to say is that, to this point, I mean, demand creates the offer, and in theory, I mean, what I keep reading is that nowadays people from my generation are no longer the ones driving the market. So the market needs, and by market I also mean what kinds of LLM-based chatbot applications you will find on your phone. Well, they're determined by Gen Z, basically, and soon enough, Gen Alpha and Beta. So the hope is that if your culture is strong enough and your voice is strong enough, you will determine what kind of applications we will all have on our phones tomorrow, right? So, I mean, in that perspective, there's hope. Where I totally don't think there is hope is thinking that there will be a deceleration of technology as long as the demand is still there. So I think, sorry, but it's a demand and offer thing that we're confronted with, and I don't think we can do a lot about it, aside from changing our culture or, influencing this way.
We'll focus on the hope message. Speak up and change things if your generation can. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was the last question. I'm sorry because we're already late, but don't worry. We're going to stay around. There's going to be an aperitif, so if you want to ask some more questions, you can. I want to really thank the four of you, Silvia Quarteroni, Nina Frey, Rachid Guerraoui, Aimee van Wynsberghe. Please give them a big round of applause. Don't forget to check the website journées-durabilité.epfl.ch for the full program of the next few days. I'd like to thank very quickly the team that organized this event, EPFL Sustainability Team and Mediacom, Justine, Agnès, Manuel, Bettina, as well as Vincent for the technique. And thank you, and santé!